The bomb comes hurtling towards Russia's troops inside Ukraine. Those troops scatter, desperately trying to avoid the explosive fury that's about to come raining down upon them. Many don't make it. They're caught in the blast, adding to a Russian casualty list that already exceeds 1.05 million. Has Ukraine just launched another successful attack? No. The bomb that took out the Russian soldiers was fired from inside Russia itself in an incident of friendly fire that's becoming all too common. It may sound unbelievable, but Russia has accidentally bombed itself 100 times in 2025 alone. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which reported on July 29 that the independent Russian media outlet Astra has reported that Russia has managed to hit itself repeatedly with its own bombs in 2025. The failures stem from multiple issues, which will be covered later in the video. But one of the primary culprits seemed to be the modified aerial bombs Putin has relied on to pelt Ukraine. These bombs, which are Soviet-era dumb bombs converted using special wing kits that allow them to glide into Ukraine, are failing when those wing kits fail to deploy properly. A dumb bomb can't glide without wings. All it can do is fall directly down, right onto the very Russians that are trying to launch it. Astra provides more details in a Telegram post that also digs into some of the individual incidents of Russia bombing itself. Already, 100 Russian aerial bombs have accidentally fallen on regions of Russia and occupied territories of Ukraine in 2025, it says when opening its Telegram post. For context, that number covers approximately the first 7 months of 2025. That means Russia is bombing itself, on average, about 14 times per month. That's almost once every 2 days, which is an embarrassing statistic for Putin's forces. And not all of those self-bombings are due to failed glide bombs. The Kyiv Post says that the incidents are split between 93 modified aerial bombs, 7 of Russia's supposedly precision-guided glide bombs, and 3 missiles. This statistic is even more worrying for Putin. While a cheap glide kit failing can be excused, there's no way around the fact that missiles Russia is spending millions of dollars to develop or buy from its overseas partners are failing to the point where they're landing on Russia's own people. The term people is used very deliberately for a simple reason. It's not just Russia's soldiers who are having to deal with the country bombing itself. Astra makes that clear with the first incident it highlights in its Telegram report. One of them fell right next to a boarding school. Children were not injured, the outlet says. That simple pair of sentences showcases a stark reality of the war that Putin is waging against Ukraine. Russia's leader simply doesn't care about civilian casualties. Ukrainians already knew this. In June 2025 alone, Russian bombs and drones killed 232 Ukrainian civilians and injured 1,343 more. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine revealed on July 10. Those numbers add to a first 6 months of 2025 that's seen a 54% increase in Ukrainian civilian casualties when compared to the same period in 2024. An already devastating 4,381 civilians were killed or injured thanks to Russia's bombs during the first half of 2024. The first half of 2025 has delivered 6,754 civilian casualties to Ukraine. However, the revelation that Russia's modified aerial bombs, in particular, are failing often enough for almost 100 of them to have hit Russian civilians and soldiers showcases that Putin also doesn't care about his own people. He's not actively targeting them, as he is targeting Ukrainians. That would obviously be counterproductive. But Putin also shows no inclination to consider changing his tactics, even when Russia itself is being hit by the bombs he's approved for launch. Luckily, the faulty bomb that landed near a boarding school didn't kill anybody. And it looks like Putin's luck in that instance held out for the other incidents Astra reports. Another 5 new cases of Russian aerial bombs falling were recorded by Astra based on data from sources since June 26. Astra's Telegram post states, thus 2 FABs fell in the Belgorod region, Fab 250 on Pobedy Street in the village of Bodkanovka in the Novoskolsky district, and Fab 500 near a residential building on Kalinina Street in the village of Bershakovo in the Shebekinsky district. There were no casualties. Russia lucked out again, it seems. And the same was true for 3 more incidents on which Astra reports. Another 2 Russian aerial bombs fell in the occupied part of Donetsk region in Ukraine, next to a residential building in Debaltseve, and right next to a children's boarding school in Yasinuvata, Astra says. The bombs did not explode and were neutralized. No one was injured. Another aerial bomb fell in the occupied village of Vysokaya in the Zaporizhia region, according to Astra. Again, no civilian casualties appear to have been reported. But that's not really the point. Putin being lucky that Russia's failed bombs aren't killing any of his country's citizens doesn't take away from the fact that he doesn't seem to care about those bombs are landing on Russia's territory in the first place. And bear in mind that Astra only covered 9 of the 100 incidents that have occurred in 2025. There's not much known about the other 90 or so, including where the bombs landed or how many of Russia's people they might have killed. It's pretty clear that Russia has an aerial bomb problem that Putin is doing nothing to fix. But it may also have some problems with precision-guided glide bombs. Mentioned earlier was that 7 of the more than 100 recorded incidents involved Russia's glide bombs rather than its modified aerial bombs. However, on July 10, the Kyiv Post reported on a missile incident in the Russian border region of Belgorod. It says that both photographs and footage from the region showed what appeared to be a booster used in a Pantsir S-1 missile lodged into the wall of an apartment building. The Pantsir S-1 is an air defense missile that Russia deploys to try to counteract Ukraine's long-range drone strikes on its territory. That appears to have been what happened in July. Ukraine sent drones into Russia, and Russia responded with air defense missiles, part of one which made for a terrifying surprise present to the unsuspecting residents of the apartment building where it landed. Astra published both a photograph and a video of the missile booster on its Telegram channel, though it didn't confirm whether any civilians had been harmed by the strike. So, it's not just modified aerial bombs with pop-out wings and some precision-guided bombs that are going awry. The very missiles that Russia is using to defend its territory against Ukraine's long-range drones now present a threat to the country's people. And Russia hitting itself with its own bombs isn't just a 2025 problem. It was doing the same thing to itself in 2024. In May 2024, the Kyiv Post reported that Russia had managed to conduct 50 abnormal munitions releases on itself during the first 3 months of the year. Abnormal munitions releases is a ridiculous term that ultimately means Russia was dropping bombs on itself. Most were accidentally released by aircraft flying in the Belgorod and Voronezh regions of Russia. And again, it was the same problem. Glide bomb wing kits weren't activating the way they were supposed to, leaving dumb bombs to just drop out of the skies. This time, Russia's bombing itself caused more damage than any of the failed bombs Astra has reported on in 2025. For instance, May 12, 2024 saw Russia launch one of its own bombs at a multi-story building in Belgorod, utterly destroying the structure. Another explosion in Belgorod about a week before destroyed 30 houses and injured 7 Russian civilians. In both cases, Russia tried to claim that Ukraine had launched bombs at Belgorod, only for independent sources to reveal that the true culprits were fab-dumb bombs that Russia had attempted to convert with its glide kits. By the end of 2024, Astra had reported at least 165 of these types of incidents throughout the year, says the Kyiv Post. If Russia maintains the same pace of bombing itself that's been seen so far in 2025, it will break that record by about 5 bombs. Again, this showcases just how little that Putin has done to try and fix a problem that he's known about for almost 2 years at this point. Russia's bombs keep falling on its own people. Putin does nothing about it. So Russia has hit itself with around 100 of its own bombs in 2025. The obvious question now has to be asked: why does this keep happening? The first part of the answer involves a Russian failure that began right at the beginning of Putin's Ukraine invasion. When Russia invaded Ukraine, most thought that Putin's forces would easily gain air superiority and eventually complete dominance over Ukraine's skies. And on paper, that seemed to be a sure thing. Russia's air force is many times the size of Ukraine's, even today. According to Global Firepower, which ranks 145 military nations annually based on a number of factors, Russia's air force currently has 4,292 aircraft compared to just 324 for Ukraine. The numbers are incredibly lopsided on the fighter jet and attack type fronts, with Russia having 763 more of the former than Ukraine and 653 more of the latter. Ukraine wasn't supposed to stand a chance on the aerial front. Only Russia failed to achieve aerial dominance during the early stages of the invasion and is still failing to have its aircraft maintain any sort of significant presence in Ukraine's skies. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 421 of its planes along with 340 of its helicopters, with the majority of both being lost within the first year of the war before Putin essentially withdrew his air force from Ukraine's territory. Why the withdrawal? The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, explained in a June 2022 article covering the failure of Putin's initial invasion. CSIS points out that Putin initially had grand plans for his air force. He was going to use Russia's overwhelming numbers advantage to pin down Ukraine's air defenses, taking them out of the game entirely. From there, the Air Force would expand its list of targets to include Ukraine's military infrastructure, arms shipments it was receiving from the West, and key parts of the country's logistics network. But none of that happened, as CSIS explains. The Russian Air Force failed to achieve air superiority against a Ukrainian military with notable air defense capabilities, such as Stinger man-portable air defense systems, S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, and other systems, thanks in part to Western aid, CSIS reports. Ukraine's air defenses were so successful that they prevented Russia's aircraft from flying into its airspace because those defenses destroyed so many that Putin didn't want to risk losing more than he already had. The aircraft were withdrawn. And for a while, Putin was forced to rely on cruise missile strikes conducted by the Black Sea Fleet and from within the pro-Russian country of Belarus. This failure wasn't a short-lived problem for Russia, as Western support intensified and Ukraine began receiving more modern air defenses from its allies, such as the US-made Patriot missile system. Putin became even less inclined to send his aircraft into Ukraine. By 2024, the consensus was clear. Russia's air force had drastically underperformed in Ukraine. By that point, air parity reigned supreme, with neither side managing to control Ukraine's skies, says the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS. The IISS also points out that the pressure placed on Russian industry by Western sanctions led to Putin becoming even more risk-averse when it came to deploying Russia's fighter jets and bombers. Putin couldn't afford to lose any more than he had for two reasons. The losses were humiliating, and Russia's creaking industrial base was struggling to build replacement aircraft for those that had been shot down in Ukraine. By now, the question becomes what all of this has to do with Russia bombing itself. It's simple. After Russia failed to make its supposed aerial superiority count in Ukraine, it was forced to turn to other ideas to ensure it could hurt Ukraine from the skies without potentially sacrificing its aircraft. And by the end of 2023 and into the beginning of 2024, Russia had come up with an answer: modified aerial bombs. The very weapons that are failing so often as to cause Russia to attack itself 100 times in 2025 and over 250 times between January 2024 and today. Aerial bombs were hailed as a massive breakthrough for Russia in a war where its air force had been practically neutralized. It's easy to see why. Using special wing kits that the BBC says cost between $20,000 and $30,000 to build, Russia was able to convert its massive stockpile of Soviet-era Fab bombs into weapons that it could actually use against Ukraine. Before the creation of these wing kits, those Fab bombs would have to be deployed by flying a bomber directly over a target, opening the bomber up to air defense fire that could take it down. With the kits in play, which are little more than wings loaded with a GPS for navigation, Russia was able to develop a new strategy. Rather than flying its aircraft into Ukraine, it could send them into the skies above its own airfields and behind the front lines before launching its new bombs. Those bombs would then glide dozens of miles toward their target, delivering an explosive payload that is many times higher than an artillery shell. It didn't matter that these new glide bombs weren't particularly accurate. What mattered to Putin is that they were cheap and he could create thousands of them thanks to the massive stockpiles of Fab bombs that would otherwise have just rotted away in Russian warehouses. Russia's factory started churning these new bombs out in record numbers, and Ukraine felt the brunt of the damage. By January 2025, the Ukrainian Air Force was estimating that Russia had launched 51,000 guided aerial bombs at Ukraine, 40,000 of which were launched in 2024 alone, Reuters reports. That amounts to an average of about 3,333 per month. Russia finally had an aerial strategy upon which Putin felt he could rely, or as the case turned out to be, over-rely. The biggest benefit of these bombs, namely that they're cheap to build, has likely also played a part in Russia accidentally bombing itself 100 times in 2025. A $30,000 wing kit is never going to be the most high-tech of tools, and the sheer rate at which Russia has been churning them out means it's almost inevitable that mistakes were going to be made in some of the kits. Those mistakes have manifested in some of the wing kits failing to open up properly, leading to guided bombs dropping out of the skies. And given that those bombs are being launched from inside Russia or in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine, there's only one place where they can go when a wing kit fails: right back to Russia. So what's clear here is that the abject failure of Russia's air force to create aerial dominance over Ukraine forced Putin to look for alternative ways to attack Ukraine from the skies. He found that alternative in modifying aerial bombs, but a percentage of those bombs, albeit a fairly small percentage, failed to do what they were designed to do, creating terror among Russia's soldiers and citizens. There is another potential factor at play in Russia's consistent bombing of itself: training. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which points to a January 2024 report published by the UK's Ministry of Defence, or MOD, that examined some of the early instances of Russia bombing itself. That report suggested the incidents were likely caused by a combination of inadequate training leading to faulty procedures for arming aircraft prior to flights, poor mission execution by aircrew, and crew fatigue, the Kyiv Post says. And the MOD had a point. Russia's Air Force training is so dismal that several outlets have reported on it. One of those outlets is Business Insider, which wrote in April 2023 that Russia's pilots were struggling to help their country gain air superiority due to a combination of terrible training and outdated equipment. Business Insider was writing about a report published by the Royal United Services Institute, which said that Russia's pilots hadn't received the sort of training they needed to operate inside Ukraine. Very few Russian fixed-wing pilots had significant training or currency for very low-altitude close air support in contested airspace, since this never formed part of their core training tasks before the invasion, the report said, while adding that Russia has also failed to invest in the modern sensors, weapons, and training its pilots need to deliver the air superiority Russia wanted. While this report focuses on Russia's failure to use its air force inside Ukraine, it's easy to see how this lack of training could translate to the pilots who are now tasked with using outdated aerial platforms to launch guided bombs at Ukraine. After all, if Russia wasn't investing in adequate training when it had the time and money to prepare for its Ukraine invasion, how likely is it that the country's pilots are getting adequate training for launching those bombs now that Russia is dealing with a whole lot more financial pressure? In a conversation with the Center for European Policy Analysis, retired United States Air Force Lieutenant General Scott Kinsvater highlighted plenty of other problems in the Russian Air Force. Beyond a lack of proper training, Russia's pilots are likely not as proficient or experienced as Putin needs them to be, Kyiv points out. They also don't seem to have the support of adequate air staff and are often guilty of either misusing their equipment or having to deal with using equipment that isn't fit for purpose. Endemic corruption within the Russian Air Force may have contributed to these problems, Kyiv adds, which is exacerbated by a hesitancy to reveal just how bad Russia's Air Force are after years of investment in new aircraft, and when Russian strategic comms suggest that they're modern and professional. In other words, the Russian Air Force doesn't want to come clean about its many problems, and Putin likely wouldn't want to hear it anyway. Don't underestimate the impact this terrible training may have had on Russia's bad habit of launching its own bombs at itself. Yes, many of those bombs may have hit Russia because of mechanical failures in its hastily developed wing kits, but it's also possible that those wing kits may have been improperly deployed by inexperienced and poorly trained pilots who simply don't know what they're doing because Russia isn't spending enough time or resources to teach them. Russia's Air Force is in shambles, and it's that shambles, perhaps more than anything else, that's leading to so many instances of Russia bombing itself when it's meant to be hitting Ukraine. Now, as Russia's Air Force is failing so badly that it's attacking its own territory with bombs, Ukraine's Air Force is going from strength to strength. Not only have F-16s arrived in Ukraine, but the country has come up with an almost magical trick to make those US-made fighter jets untouchable. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more up-to-date videos covering the latest Russian failures in the Ukraine war.